Let me tell you about a Tuesday morning I will never forget. I've been on the bench for over 30 years. I've seen liars, the innocent wrongly accused, and the arrogant who think they're above the law. But this particular morning, as the next case was called, a strange silence blanketed my courtroom, a silence that signaled a heartbreaking story was about to unfold. Next case, City versus Sarah Jenkins. From the back row, a young woman timidly stood up. Sarah Jenkins was 28 years old, but the deep lines of hardship etched onto her face made her appear much older. She wore a thin coat, frayed at the elbows, and old shoes woefully inadequate for the cold. She walked slowly toward the defendant's stand, her head bowed low, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white with fear. She didn't dare look up at anyone, especially not the man sitting across from her, Police Officer Michael Reynolds, the man who had arrested her. Officer Reynolds was a large man, his face stern, his uniform pressed without a single wrinkle. He stood with his arms crossed, projecting the unwavering gaze of law enforcement that knows no compromise. To Reynolds, the law was black and white. There were no gray areas. Theft was theft, regardless of the reason. And today, he was here to ensure justice was served upon the woman he viewed as a professional petty thief. I lowered my glasses to the bridge of my nose and observed the woman trembling before me. I didn't rush to look at the case file. I wanted to look at the human being. I saw her thin shoulders shaking uncontrollably. I heard the suppressed whimpers escaping her throat. After 30 years on that bench, I know the difference between a performance and real fear. This was pure fear, the desperation of a human being backed into a corner. "Miss Jenkins," I began, my voice firm and commanding, "you are charged with theft of property at the Fresh Market grocery store on the 15th of last month. Officer Reynolds has reported that you were caught red-handed attempting to conceal merchandise inside your coat and leaving without paying. How do you plead? Guilty or not guilty?" Sarah lifted her head, her eyes bloodshot and brimming with tears. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her throat was choked with emotion. "Your Honor," Officer Reynolds spoke up before Sarah could answer, his voice steely. "The defendant was captured entirely on security camera. The value of the stolen goods is not large, but the act of theft is a blatant violation of social order. This store has been hit too many times this month, and we need a strict sentence to serve as a deterrent." I nodded, acknowledging the officer, but I did not rush to judgment. I picked up the police report and read through the list of stolen items. My eyebrows furrowed. Something in this list made me stop. This was not the inventory of a petty thief looking to resell goods for cash. "Officer Reynolds, did you inspect the items Miss Jenkins took?" "I did, Your Honor. They were standard goods." "Standard?" I repeated. Then I began to read the list aloud, slowly and clearly, so the entire courtroom could hear every word. 1 carton of fresh milk, a loaf of sandwich bread, 2 cans of chicken soup, and 3 jars of baby food. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted instantly. The murmurs of the crowd vanished, replaced by a silence so heavy you could hear a heartbeat. That list was not evidence of greed. It was a list of survival. It was a mother's cry for help. I set the paper down and looked directly at Sarah. "Miss Jenkins, would you like to explain to me why you took these things? Why would a young woman trade your dignity for a few cartons of milk and bread?" That question broke the dam, holding back Sarah's emotions. She broke down completely, gripping the railing to keep from collapsing. I'm so sorry, Your Honor," she sobbed. "I didn't have any other choice. My kids haven't eaten in 2 days. I lost my job. The landlord is kicking us out. I just wanted them to have 1 full meal." Sarah's cries echoed through the vast room, piercing the hearts of everyone present. Yet Officer Reynolds stood still, his face revealing no emotion, though his eyes flickered with a hint of uncertainty. I looked at Officer Reynolds, then back at Sarah. I knew this was not merely a simple theft case. This was a trial of society's conscience, but I did not sentence her yet. I wanted to dig deeper. "Miss Jenkins, you said you lost your job. You said the father of your children isn't helping. Tell me how you got here. How does a mother end up stealing soup in a grocery store?" Sarah wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her tattered coat and took a shaky breath. "Your Honor, 6 months ago, my life was normal. I worked as a waitress at a diner downtown. It wasn't much, but it put food on the table. My husband left us 2 years ago. He just walked out one day and never came back. No child support, no calls, nothing. A ripple of sympathy moved through the gallery. But we were managing. Then my youngest, Leo, he got sick, severe asthma. I had to miss shifts to take him to the emergency room. My boss said he couldn't rely on me anymore. He fired me over a text message while I was sitting in the hospital waiting room. She looked down at her hands, ashamed. I applied for assistance, Your Honor. I filled out every form. I stood in every line. But the system said my paperwork is pending. It's been pending for 8 weeks. Pending doesn't feed a 2-year-old. Pending doesn't pay for an inhaler. I went to the food bank, but by the time I walked there, I had to sell my car to pay rent. They were out of boxes. I walked into that store not as a thief, but as a mother hearing her son cry from hunger pains. I didn't want to steal. I just wanted the crying to stop. Tears streamed freely down the faces of several people in the audience. Even the court clerk, usually stoic, looked down at her desk to hide her emotion. I let the weight of her words settle in the room. Then I turned slowly to Officer Reynolds. Officer Reynolds, you heard her story. A mother trying to feed a sick child. Does this context change your perspective on the blatant violation of social order you mentioned earlier? Reynolds uncrossed his arms, shifting his weight. Your Honor, it is a tragic story, truly, but my job is to enforce the law, not adjudicate social welfare. If we make an exception because her story is sad, we have to make an exception for everyone. Theft is a crime. If she needed help, there are charities. Breaking the law cannot be the solution we endorse in this court. Subscribe right now. You do not want to miss where this goes. He turned to me. Your Honor, I've run that store for 20 years. I know what a thief looks like. I know the junkies who steal razor blades to sell. I know the kids who steal candy for a thrill. When I watched her on the monitor, she wasn't sneaking. She was crying. She stood in the baby aisle for 10 minutes holding a jar of peaches, counting pennies in her hand. She put the peaches back. She put the expensive bread back and took the cheapest one. A real thief takes the steak, Your Honor. She took the sustenance. The room was paralyzed. The narrative of the criminal was unraveling. I went out to the floor to talk to her. I was going to tell her to just take it. I've done it before for regulars who hit hard times, but before I could get there, Officer Reynolds was already at the door. When I said handle it, I meant help her, not handcuff her. Reynolds's face flushed a deep crimson. The law doesn't require the victim's permission to make an arrest for a crime committed in plain sight. I was doing my duty. Duty? I interrupted, my voice booming. Mr. Henderson just told you he intended to show mercy. He intended to be a human being before being a business owner, and you, officer, stepped in to turn a moment of charity into a criminal record. Mr. Henderson, so you do not wish to press charges? No, Your Honor. I want to drop them. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. The total of what she took was $11.50. Here is $20. I'd like to pay for her groceries retroactively. Consider it a sale, not a theft. Gasps erupted from the gallery. But Officer Reynolds wasn't backing down. His pride was on the line. Your Honor, the state is the plaintiff here, not just Mr. Henderson. If we let this slide, we send a message that if you cry hard enough, the law doesn't apply to you. I stared at Reynolds for a long, uncomfortable moment. You are worried about the message we send, officer? Good, because I am too. And in about 2 minutes, I'm going to send a message that this city will never forget. I reached for my gavel, but paused. Before I rule, I want to introduce one more piece of evidence, something Officer Reynolds might have missed in his rush to uphold the social order. I motioned to the bailiff, who handed me a clear plastic evidence bag containing the personal effects confiscated from Sarah at the time of her arrest, a set of keys with a broken fob, a chapstick, and a folded, crumpled piece of lined notebook paper. Officer Reynolds, when you processed Miss Jenkins, you logged this piece of paper as item number 4. You described it in your report as trash found in suspect's pocket. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. It looked like garbage. I didn't think it was relevant. Everything is relevant in my courtroom, officer. I carefully extracted the paper. It was stained with what looked like dried tears. I unfolded it. The paper crinkled loudly in the silent room. Miss Jenkins, do you know what this is? Sarah looked up, her face pale. She recognized it immediately, and a fresh wave of shame washed over her. Please don't read it, she whispered. I have to, Sarah, because this isn't trash. This is the most important piece of evidence in this entire case. I adjusted my glasses and began to read aloud. Dear Mr. Thompson, I am writing to beg you, please do not change the locks today. I know I am 2 months behind. I know you gave me until Tuesday, but I have an interview tomorrow at the diner on Main Street. I promise if I get the job, I will pay you every cent. Please just give me 48 more hours. My babies have nowhere else to go. It is going to snow tonight. Please have mercy on us." I lowered the paper. The silence in the room was absolute, suffocating. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. "Officer Reynolds, you found this in her pocket. You held it in your hands. Did you read it?" The officer shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable for the first time. His confident posture began to sag. I just logged it, Your Honor. I didn't think it was my place to read her personal mail. If you had read it, you would have known this wasn't a woman looking for a thrill. You would have known she was stealing because she was facing the literal freezing of her children on the streets. You spoke about the social order, officer, but what kind of social order allows a mother to be so terrified of the cold that she has to beg for 48 hours of shelter? What kind of order prioritizes the price of a can of soup over the safety of 2 toddlers? Sarah was sobbing quietly now. Mr. Henderson was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. "This letter was dated yesterday, the day of the arrest. Miss Jenkins, did you deliver it?" Sarah shook her head. "No, Your Honor, I was too ashamed. I was going to give it to him after I got food for the kids, so at least they would have full bellies if we had to sleep in the car. But I never made it back home because I got arrested." The realization hit the room like a physical blow. "Wait," I said, a sudden look of alarm crossing my face. "You never made it home. Who is with the children now?" Panic flooded Sarah's eyes. "My neighbor, Mrs. Gable. She watches them when I look for work, but she's elderly. She can't keep them overnight. I used my one phone call from the station to call her, but she didn't answer. I don't know if she knows where I am." This was no longer just a legal matter. It was an emergency. Officer Reynolds' face lost all its color. I didn't know about the neighbor. I assumed they were with a relative." "You assumed," I repeated, my voice cold as steel. "You assumed she was a common criminal. You assumed the evidence was trash. And because of your assumptions, 2 children might be sitting in an apartment right now, waiting for a mother locked in a holding cell over $11 worth of groceries." I turned to the bailiff. "Get me a phone, now. This trial is paused until we ensure those children are safe." But as the bailiff scrambled to comply, the doors to the back of the courtroom burst open. A young woman, out of breath and looking frantic, rushed in. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't a witness. "Sarah!" the woman screamed. "Sarah, thank God!" It was the neighbor's daughter, and clinging to her legs were 2 small, terrified children, a boy and a girl, looking around the intimidating courtroom with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Mommy!" the little boy cried out, breaking free and running down the center aisle. Officer Reynolds instinctively stepped forward to block the aisle out of habit. But then he saw the boy. He saw the worn-out shoes. He saw the fear. And for the first time in his career, that officer froze. Not out of duty, but out of something else entirely. The little boy sprinted past the officer's polished boots and crashed into Sarah's legs at the defendant's stand. Sarah collapsed to her knees, pulling him into her chest with a desperation that was painful to watch. The younger child, a toddler girl, reached out her chubby arms toward her mother, whimpering. "I've got you, baby. Mommy's here. I'm right here," Sarah whispered frantically, burying her face in her son's neck. "I didn't leave you. I promise I didn't leave you." The neighbor's daughter approached the bench, panting. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. My mom had a spell. An ambulance came. I couldn't leave them there, and they wouldn't stop screaming for Sarah. I didn't know where else to go." I raised a hand gently to silence her. "You did the right thing. Let them be." The strict decorum of the judicial system had dissolved into a scene of raw, unfiltered humanity. There were no criminals or prosecutors anymore. There was only a mother and her children. Officer Reynolds slowly turned around to face the scene he had inadvertently orchestrated. He looked at the boy's shoes, cheap sneakers held together with gray duct tape. He looked at the little girl's coat, too small for her, her wrists exposed to the cold. And then he looked at the evidence table, the milk, the bread, the baby food. The connection slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. Those jars of baby food weren't just inventory. They were for her. The bread was for him. I watched the exact moment the armor cracked. His jaw unclenched, his shoulders slumped, and the steely conviction in his eyes was replaced by something that looked a lot like shame. "Officer Reynolds," I said quietly, "look at them. Is this the order you were protecting? Separating a 4-year-old from his mother over $11? Reynolds swallowed hard. The criminal he had arrested was on her knees, checking her son for a fever, wiping his nose with her sleeve, kissing his forehead. She was a threat to no one. I didn't know, Your Honor. The report didn't mention the duct tape on the shoes. The report never does, officer. The law sees the action. Justice sees the person. That is why I sit in this chair, to see the things the report leaves out. I am sorry, Reynolds whispered, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. I failed you today. I failed these kids. He looked at the little boy, then reached into his pocket, not for a ticket book, for his wallet. Your Honor, as the arresting officer and with the consent of the victim, Mr. Henderson, I am officially withdrawing the complaint against Sarah Jenkins. A collective sigh of relief swept through the gallery. The stolen items totaled $11.50. Mr. Henderson put in $20. Reynolds pulled out 5 $20 bills, $100 in total. This is for the groceries and for a warm meal tonight. He placed the money gently into Sarah's trembling hand. She stared at the cash, then at the officer, unable to process the sudden shift from persecution to salvation. Officer, I can't take it. Please, Reynolds insisted gently. Let me do my job. Let me help. I sat back in my chair. I have a reputation for being tough, for not suffering fools. But watching that rigid, by-the-book officer choose humanity over bureaucracy right in front of my eyes was a victory far greater than any legal ruling I have ever handed down. Officer Reynolds, a few minutes ago, you were worried about the message we were sending. Let me tell you what message you just sent. You told this city that the law is not a machine. You told this little boy that police officers are indeed helpers. You chose humanity over bureaucracy. That is the highest form of service. I picked up my gavel. The charges are dismissed. But I paused, looking out at the audience. We are not done yet. We have a mother who needs 48 hours to save her home. Officer Reynolds has started something. Mr. Henderson has chipped in, but I think we can do better. I am going to ask the bailiff to pass the bucket, not for court fees, not for fines, but for a fresh start. But I wasn't finished. I picked up the crumpled letter again. Officer Reynolds and this community have solved your immediate problem, but we need to solve the long-term problem. I see here you mentioned a landlord, Mr. Thompson, and an interview at the diner on Main Street. Sarah wiped her face. Yes, Your Honor, the interview is tomorrow at 8 a.m. if I still have a home to shower in. I smiled, a mischievous glint in my eye, and reached for the phone on my desk. Bailiff, get me Mr. Thompson on the line. Speakerphone, please. The room went silent again with anticipation. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Hello? Yeah. Who is this? Mr. Thompson, this is Judge Judy Scheindlin. You are on speakerphone in front of about 100 people. A nervous pause. Oh, good morning, Your Honor. Did I get a ticket? Laughter rippled through the courtroom, breaking the tension beautifully. No, you're not in trouble. But I have your tenant here, Miss Sarah Jenkins. She has the money for the back rent, all of it, cash in hand. Oh, his tone softened instantly. Well, that's great news. I was worried I'd have to evict her. I didn't want to, Judge. But business is business. I understand. But here is what we are going to do. She is coming home to her children. You are not changing the locks. And you are going to give her a grace period for the next month while she gets back on her feet. Do we have a deal? Absolutely, Judge. Consider it done. Tell her I'll turn the heat up a bit, too. It's cold out there. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. You're a good man. I hung up. Sarah let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for weeks. The eviction nightmare was over. Now, about this interview at the diner. I leaned forward with a mischievous glint in my eye. You know, this is a small city, Sarah, and the owner of that diner happens to be someone I know personally. Sarah's eyes widened. The courtroom gasped. I can't promise you the job. You have to earn it, but I can promise you that he is going to take that interview very seriously. I dialed a number from memory. Tony, it's Judy. Listen, I'm sending a young woman your way tomorrow morning. Sarah Jenkins. She's a mother. She's a fighter, and she needs a break. I paused, listening. I smiled. That's what I thought. Thanks, Tony. I hung up and looked at Sarah. He's expecting you. Don't be late. Sarah stood there, stunned. In the span of 30 minutes, she had gone from facing jail time and homelessness to having her rent paid, her fridge filled, and a personal recommendation for a job. The weight of the world had been lifted off her shoulders by the sheer force of compassion. Miss Jenkins, you came in here as a defendant. You are leaving as a testament to what happens when we listen with our hearts. But before you go, there is one last person who needs to say something. I pointed to the little boy, still holding Officer Reynolds's hand. The bond between the enforcer and the child had become the anchor of the entire room. The heavy tension of judgment had been replaced by the warm silence of reverence. Reynolds was kneeling on one knee again, eye to eye with Sarah's 4-year-old son. "Son, you asked me earlier if I help people." The boy nodded, clutching the officer's hand with both of his small ones. "I want you to remember today. I want you to remember that when things got scary, people stepped up. Your mom is brave. She fought for you. And this," he gestured around the room, "this is what a community looks like." Reynolds reached into his pocket and pulled out a small gold lapel pin, a miniature police badge he kept for special occasions. He pinned it carefully onto the boy's worn-out T-shirt. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed today is the difference between the law and justice." I picked up the case file, the document that had labeled Sarah a thief, and held it up. The law is written on paper. It is black and white. It tells us that if you steal, you must be punished. And under the strict letter of the law, Miss Jenkins is guilty. I paused, looking at Sarah holding her daughter close. "But justice," I said, tearing the file in half with a sharp rip that echoed through the room. "Justice is written in the heart. Justice understands that a mother's love is a force of nature, not a crime. Justice understands that sometimes the law shouldn't be a hammer that strikes you down, but a hand that lifts you up." I tossed the torn pieces into the wastebasket. "Sarah Jenkins, the charges against you are dismissed with prejudice. Gone forever. You have no criminal record. You have a job interview tomorrow. You have a home tonight. And you have a city that believes in you." I looked at her with a warm smile. "Now go feed those babies. And good luck at Tony's. Tell him I said to put extra cheese on the meatball sub." "Thank you, Your Honor," Sarah choked out. "Thank you for giving me my life back." "Don't thank me," I replied, gesturing to Officer Reynolds and Mr. Henderson. "Thank the goodness in people." Case dismissed. Nobody moved to leave immediately. Sarah gathered her children. When she had walked in, her head was bowed and her spirit broken. Now, as she walked down the center aisle toward the exit, she held her head high. She wasn't just a struggling single mom anymore. She was a woman who had been seen, heard, and validated. As she passed the rows of seats, people nodded at her. Some smiled. The shame of poverty had been lifted, replaced by the dignity of survival. At the heavy wooden doors, Officer Reynolds was waiting. He held the door open for her. "Good luck, Sarah," he said softly. "Thank you, officer," she replied, meeting his eyes. "For everything." As the heavy doors closed behind her, I sat back in my chair and took off my glasses. I looked tired, but it was a good tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from doing something right in a world that often goes wrong. I looked over at the bailiff. "What's next on the docket?" The bailiff smiled, shaking his head in disbelief at everything he had just witnessed. "A parking ticket, Your Honor, just a parking ticket," I chuckled, putting my glasses back on. "All right, bring them in. Let's see if we can help them."